me personally, I take drawings in two directions. One of them, I suppose, more than the other, which is the simple communicative sketch that I do either for myself or to share with staff or a client. This is something that happens at meetings, for instance. You'll discuss a certain thing and it's much easier to just simply illustrate it. And then in the other end of the scale, I can sit down for hours and do elaborate watercolors and artworks, pointing out that we believe in our office that architecture is an art form. And so we kind of work with the images in the same way as you would with visual arts. So that's like an extreme in either direction. I think if you're a writer, you'll do the same thing. You'll write grocery lists or text messages. At the other end of the scale, you'll write a novel and everything in between. I could give you an example of a project we're working on in Mexico right now with it's a clean tech business, and we've been talking very much about the fact that they're one business. They want to be one company. They want to live in the same building. So at the moment, they're in numerous locations with different buildings. Some of them are old buildings, some of them are newer buildings. They're all different. And they want to just move into one building together. And one of the things we've discussed is how do you actually connect people across the different floors, because we're going to have several floors. Let's say in this case 3 floors. You can create an atrium in the middle of the building, and if you see this section, it's something like this. You have the floors, people can kind of see each other across the atrium. But in this case, we took it one step further because we still kind of had the idea that if you're on this floor, you do not connect 100% with the person on that floor. And this guy would be talking about this guy as the person on the other floor, the 3rd floor crew, whatever. So we said, okay, let's think about the entire business as one house. Here's one division. Here's another division. Here's a 3rd division. And they all have their own responsibilities, but they need to work together. So being in one floor would be perfect. That's not possible on the side. So let's just turn it into a spiral. So it actually becomes one floor. And if we work with these hatches, these guys would be down here. This hatch would be up here. These guys would be up here. So they're still on one floor, and yet they fit right into the cube. So that's one way of thinking. And this is one really fast and kind of primitive way of illustrating that. And then of course I could make a more precise, more delicate sketch where you see tiny little details. It wouldn't be as messy as this, but the idea pretty much is the same. And this kind of sums it up. I think for me personally, I kind of built the stuff inside of my mind and I basically just printed. And I know from talking to other architects that many architects think as they draw. I don't do that. I'm always many steps ahead of what I draw. So I'm pretty much printing what the whiteboard I have in my mind, which is a little, people find it odd. And they actually notice without me telling, oh, you're just printing, aren't you? And that's exactly what I do. And I don't know how that really works, but sometimes an idea like this is composed in my mind when I'm running in the forest. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. So it's already there. And so illustrating it is something I can just basically print. It doesn't appear as I draw. It appears before. And then drawing is just a way of sharing it. One of the first projects we did in Abu Dhabi was the revitalization of a historic site. And it's pretty much square. It's a little angled down here, but it's 400 by 400 meters. And the interesting thing is that on that site, we already had two historic and important buildings. There was the fort, the White Fort, the Qasr al-Hosn itself, dating back to 1763, and then the Cultural Foundation building right next to it. So in one site we had a heritage building and a modern heritage building. So with that starting point, we actually decided to divide the site into like this, creating two different kinds of atmospheres, or two different kinds of settings for those buildings. And that was part of the idea, actually, that these buildings would remain the champions of the site. So the area here is, to this day, when we've built it now, it's finished, it's very open, desert-like. And the building is rotated. Whereas here, the CFB, the Cultural Foundation building, is on the city grid. And it's on paving and somewhat more sort of plain, a plain field. And then as the last addition, we enhanced the diagonal, sort of the division of the site, to actually create a link between two very important infrastructural streets here, the Electra and the Hamdan. And to do that, we introduced the so-called water feature. That's what we've called it anyway. Not a very good name though, but anyway, that's what it is. And it has sort of a lake up here, and still the Qasr al-Hosn, the Cultural Foundation building. And then around the lake, and this sort of path pointing out that diagonal, we placed a mosque and a food and beverage area. And that's pretty much the project. I could go very much into detail with this, and it took us years to actually complete it. But in essence, these were the first sketches. The very first sketch that was done for this was simply this yin-yang type of image, or it's almost an icon or a logo. And that remains to this day. And it's looked 1,000 different ways along the way. It's been very complex, it's been a little too simple, it's been taller, lower, etc. But this underlying idea, it was always there, and it's there today, now that we've built it. And then sometimes when you elaborate on these sketches, obviously you'll find out that what works on a sketch on an overall level turns out to be difficult. And so all of these sketches, we always validate them in the computer, and we discover problems or things that we need to solve. So it's always like a stop and go process. You make the sketch, you have the idea, then you kind of test it, then you change it a little bit, you test that again, then you kind of move forward. In the end, you have the shop drawings so people can actually just build it. I would say that it's not a choice between the computer and the hand drawing. They're two very different tools, and both tools are excellent for what they do best. And obviously the computer is great for repetition. I'm already an old guy in the sense that I've drawn hundreds of identical tables in a floor plan, like hundreds, literally, just slaving away. And today you select and you copy. And then you go even further and you have parametric design where you can actually tweak all of the tables without deleting and recopying. You basically just pull a slider and they get bigger or small, whatever. That's amazing in computers. But the shortest distance between your head and something that other people can see, that's definitely runs through the hand or the pen. And so at a meeting with a client or with staff or whomever you're talking to, being able to spontaneously illustrate your thoughts, the pen is totally superior. So we were commissioned to do an unheated sports facility for skateboarders in Haderslev, Denmark, a small town in Denmark. And obviously the first thing we talked about was the surface of the building. We wanted to minimize the surface of the building. And obviously any hall would typically be a box. Very efficient, you see them everywhere. But instead of a box, we decided to do a dome. So in axonometric, it looks like this. like this in section. And we turned that into a skateboarding facility simply by using the base of it as a bank, so-called bank. So in the end, you can actually skateboard the building. You might even go, that didn't happen by the way, but you could actually skateboard all over it, which was another reason for actually softening the building. But the way it is today, you skate the banks. And it posed a challenge on the site because when you do skateboarding, you want to go inside and outside. Basically, you want to skate the entire site like this, meaning that everything would be concrete, which is very hard and sort of tough and maybe too much. So we kind of reversed the idea of a concrete building on a lawn and did the opposite. We put a green building on a concrete plot. So in fact, the dome itself had a green roof, and the rest was concrete out here. So when you look at the building today, it looks a little bit like a green turf or a hill, and all of the skateboarding is going on here, and inside the building you drive right through it. The thing about architecture as an art form compared to other art forms is that you can't avoid it. You can decide to not look at pictures, you can decide to not buy that Picasso book or go to the Louisiana or wherever you go to experience art. You can kind of get around it somehow. Whereas architecture is inevitable. You sleep in architecture, you dine in architecture, we're in architecture right now. So you're kind of obligated, I think, as an architect to design something that's both beautiful and functional and speaks to all of the senses. Sense of smell, sense of the sound as well, and obviously the visual impact as well. It's almost criminal to design an ugly building that people have to live in every day, right? So you always have to be an agent for either the client or the users or both. You're kind of working for them, doing something for them that they cannot do. So you have an obligation to society and to the people that pays your bills as well. If you design something like a school, it will depend on obviously where it is, who it's for, what is the age group. Is it a school for all of the age groups? Are they supposed to be together in one space? Is it like a school within the school, different departments, etc.? One of the kind of interesting projects we did at some point was an education center for grown-ups. So basically grown-up people going back to school. And we deliberately tried to make a building that didn't look anything like a school because we didn't want to associate previous failures, academic failures, with a school environment. And one of the things we aimed at really was to create as many learning environments as possible because we know that different people learn the best in different environments. Some people are totally comfortable with big open spaces, lots of noise, people coming and going. Other people need more private spaces, dark spaces, bright spaces, etc. And essentially, the school was placed within a grid, basically. So we started out with a rather boxy sort of volume that was then shaped a little bit by the adjacent streets. It has a curving side like this. And we created the diversity within the atrium inside of the building. And we made an atrium that was quite big. I mean, sometimes an atrium can be as small as just a little dot within the building, and it can have a tremendous impact on how you actually experience the building on the inside. Here we decided to actually expand the atrium to be able to create all of that variety and diversity within this space. And so if you look at the space itself, we simply placed a number of coins. So this is one floor. But then you need to imagine that the floor beneath it, those coins or balconies are placed in different places. Essentially what it means is that when you look at the section of the building, like this, you will have a number of different space heights 2 floors, 1 floor, all of the floors. A lot of light up here, less light down here. A lot of hustle and bustle in the middle. If you go out closer to the edge, a little more quietness. So in the end, the simple idea of basically placing balconies, coins within that atrium created a super diverse school. Meaning that regardless of what you need and regardless of what difficulties you used to have with school, you should be able to find a space that works for you. It's a funny notion because I think 20 years ago, we would see newly educated architects starting in our company, and some of them couldn't even write their name with a pencil. They were totally digitalized. And then that kind of changed a little bit, and the students today, they kind of do both. They have rediscovered the power of the pencil, basically. And so they do both the computer and the pen, and they kind of go back and forth. They're not as trained in drawing as my generation, because that's all we ever did. But they actually do both today, and they pick the tool depending on what they're doing. One of the most interesting projects we did dealing with nature here in Denmark is in Revitalizing. It's up north in Jutland. Small place, doesn't matter really, but the nature up there is spectacular, which is rare in Denmark. Most of our land is cultivated, and so whenever we do have something that's natural, we really get excited about it. And obviously, what we wanted to do was to build within nature itself. Tiny information portal, meaning that people could go here to learn about the area surrounding the building and then go out and explore. So for instance, you could read about certain flowers here, then you can go out and find them. You can pick them, you can come back, compare. But we couldn't do this because all of the forests surrounding Revitalizing are actually protected. So instead, we had to build outside of the forest, on the edge of it. In fact, with a parking lot between the building and the site itself. And we were quite frustrated about it. But in the end, we decided if we can't build in the forest, we have to build outside of it. Can we bring elements from the forest to the building? So we took sort of the idea of branches and trees. And if you look at a tree, obviously it grows from the ground and up. And it branches out like this. Here's a person. And we cut out a little part of it, using that image as a facade pattern. And that became the building. And we even managed to build the actual architecture from wood that was cut in the forest. So it doesn't only look like the forest, it is indeed made by wood from the forest. This is the sun up here. It's supposed to be a perspective drawing. So it looked something like this, and in the end, it was a sampling of what you experience up here. We brought nature into the building rather than bringing the building into nature. It's a very pragmatic, I would say, way to solve a problem. But that's what creative architecture is often about. It's about working around the resistance of the context or whatever kind of resistance you have, and then turning that into your creative fuel, so to speak.